the latest in the series of major crypto industry failures. Failures of centralized crypto intermediaries like Celsius, and failures of DeFi offerings like Terra Luna. These failures arose in large part because of a feature that is unique to the crypto industry. Crypto assets can be made up out of thin air.
Happening right now on Capitol Hill, lawmakers are holding a series of hearings on the collapse of cryptocurrency exchange FTX. The company's disgraced founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, is facing 8 federal counts, including wire fraud and money laundering. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, says he defrauded investors of billions of dollars. Bankman-Fried could face as much as 115 years in prison if he is convicted on all counts. He has denied any wrongdoing, and he says investors who suffered will eventually be made whole. With me now to talk more about this, former federal prosecutor Mitchell Epner, now an attorney in New York. Thanks for being here. So a stupidity defense seems to be at play here. How will that land?
That is a very bad defense ordinarily, and Sam Bankman-Fried has made a bad defense worse by all of the things that he's said to the press in the last month.
So right now, the U.S. is trying to extradite him back here to face the charges. He is going to fight that. How successful might he be in staying in the Bahamas?
I think that he has a chance to delay things, but I don't think that he's likely to win. As you know, Julian Assange has been able to fight off extradition. He's the WikiLeaks guy for 5 years, more than 5 years from the UK. But his claim there is that his is a political offense. Here, there is no allegation that Sam Bankman-Fried is anything other than a fraudster.
So if found guilty, the significance of this crime and the charges up to 115 years, this is major, and he could spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Yes, under the federal sentencing guidelines, which are more relevant than the statutory maximum ordinarily, once you get above $550 million in loss, you're basically in life imprisonment territory. And here, according to the SEC's numbers, we're talking about billions of dollars in loss. So if he is found guilty on everything and it goes as badly as possible, he is looking at definitely decades in prison, even with time off for good behavior. He is not going to emerge from prison if convicted as a young man, if at all.
Well, and the question is, could he have done all of this alone? What do you think the likelihood is that there will be other charges, other people who will be indicted?
Well, the only thing I know for certain about the future is that it hasn't happened yet. I'd be very surprised if there were not other people indicted, including his girlfriend who ran the hedge fund that was sort of a part of FTX. It's not clear to me who was in charge of the books. It was bizarre to hear yesterday that the new CEO of FTX said that the whole thing, which was a multi-billion-dollar industry, was run off of QuickBooks. But if there was anybody who was a CEO, CFO, or CPA who was involved in all of this, then they have real exposure. Anybody who is involved in making this more saleable to the general public, they have real exposure if they knew of the underlying fraud.
Mitchell, the other element to all of this is the investors who lost millions and millions of dollars, some in the billions. What for them now?
So there are two types of investors, and they're in two different situations. There were people who were putting their money into what they thought were custody accounts, which were it's supposed to be the digital equivalent of safe deposit boxes, and were told that their money was not being invested anyplace else. It was just being held in place. I think that there's some likelihood that they will get back some, if not all, of their money. In the same way that the Madoff investors got back some, but not all of their money. Then there are the people who understood that they were taking risk. I think those people are probably going to be losing virtually all, if not all, of what they invested.
Oh, that's a tough pill to swallow. What about the people who received money? So Bankman-Fried, big political donor to both Republicans and Democrats. Will any of those political figures be asked to give money back?
Well, asked, I think, is the key word here. Nothing can force them to give the money back. But if you are somebody who makes their living getting elected, giving back the proceeds of a crime is the first thing that you want to do. This is not a situation where they just discovered, hey, the person who gave to me is an awful human being, and therefore I'm going to donate the money to charity because giving it back to the awful person is a bad idea. Here, this is the proceeds of a crime, and giving the money back will make the people who were defrauded closer to whole. So if I were advising a political candidate or a political action committee, I would say any money you received from FTX or Sam Bankman-Fried or his parents, that's money that I would be figuring out a way to get back to FTX.
Well, given the arrest and these latest charges and the fact that he's in the Bahamas, he will not be taking part in these public hearings. But are the hearings that are happening right now in D.C. that we see on the side of our screen, are they actually effective? Will they do anything?
Well, I mean, to hear John Ray, who's the new CEO of FTX, say that this was just embezzlement, pure and simple, that cuts to the chase. And one thing that I'm just shocked by is that it appears that there were no publicly audited numbers here. If you are an investor and you are talking about putting tens of thousands, let alone millions or billions of dollars into something, you need to see audited numbers. You need to have a real accounting firm standing up and saying, yes, all of the back office is in shape, because if anybody had looked at anything, they never would have invested in this sham.
Yeah, and above all else, regulatory changes likely to happen as a result of this. Mitchell Epner, interesting conversation this morning. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right,
Bye.
It's been a